There is a kind of strength that doesn't shout, doesn't argue, and doesn't explain. It simply stays calm when others provoke, when emotions surge, when the world demands a reaction. This video isn't just about silence. It's about the inner power that grows when you master the urge to react, in anger, in criticism. In chaos, Stoics don't suppress emotion. They observe it, and through this observation, they reclaim control. You'll learn why restraint isn't weakness, but the ultimate strength. Why silence can protect your peace, your values, and your dignity, especially when others try to pull you into noise and pettiness. If you've ever regretted something said in anger or felt the urge to fight every injustice, this is your moment to pause, to reflect, and to walk the path of mindful self-mastery, where silence isn't avoidance, but conscious power. Don't react when anger takes control. There are moments when blood rushes to your head, your chest tightens, and every cell in your body urges you to say something right now. Anger, when unchecked, can make you act like a stranger to yourself. You say things you shouldn't, hurt others, and later regret it. But the most frightening part isn't the anger itself. It's the consequences of the words you speak when you lose control. Stoics do not deny emotions. They feel anger, sadness, disappointment too. But they understand that reacting immediately to emotions has never been the right solution. When you're angry, your words don't come from reason. They come from a wounded ego. And that ego rarely considers consequences, rarely thinks about the relationship, and never remembers the values you stand for. Maybe you've experienced it before. An argument erupts, a harsh word breaks a relationship, or an impulsive reaction costs you an important opportunity. It all begins with 1 second of lost control. 1 second. That's all it takes to destroy the trust you spent years building. 1 second. Enough to push you into regret that no apology can erase. So what does a Stoic do when anger arises? They pause. They remain silent. They step back, not to avoid the issue, but to reclaim control. A deep breath, a calm gaze, a moment of silence. That's how they reconnect with their reason and inner values. Silence in anger isn't passivity. It is inner strength honed over time. It is a conscious choice not to be ruled by emotion. And it is how you ensure your words retain value and weight, instead of becoming meaningless weapons of harm. When you learn to stay silent in anger, you are mastering yourself. You're no longer a victim of emotion. You're the one steering it. And that is a profound expression of resilience, clear thinking, and a life grounded in purpose and values. When words make you an accomplice to pettiness, some conversations begin with something as simple as, "Have you heard about this?" And within minutes, it spirals into judgment, mockery, and conclusions about someone who isn't even there. You didn't say anything terrible. You just listened. Maybe you smiled politely, nodded, or added a few harmless comments. But even that makes you part of the circle, a circle of pettiness and negativity you didn't even notice forming. Gossip is never harmless. It feeds suspicion, jealousy, and trades away kindness for the thrill of knowing more than others. But Stoics understand this. Nothing corrupts your mind faster than letting it be soaked in stories that are empty, negative, and meaningless. Your silence in those conversations does not mean you're indifferent or lack conviction. On the contrary, it's how you protect your moral space. It's when you choose to stand by your values instead of blending into the crowd. You don't have to defend anyone or oppose anyone, just don't participate, don't encourage. And if possible, gently steer the conversation elsewhere. Silence in that moment is a declaration that you don't live to dissect others. You live to elevate yourself And when your silence is intentional, you'll notice something strange. People will trust you more. They'll speak more cautiously around you because they know you don't trade trust for a few minutes of gossip. Respect doesn't come from being right, from sharp arguments, or forceful speech. It comes from knowing what should be said and what should be kept to yourself. And in a world where words and information can become double-edged swords, ethical silence is the strongest shield to protect your dignity, values, and kindness. You don't always have to stand up and defend what's right with words sometimes. Your silence with a conscious gaze and a quiet smile of disapproval is the most powerful refusal. And in that moment, you're not just protecting others, you're preserving the integrity within yourself. No one can hurt you if you don't react. There's a hard truth to accept, but it forms the foundation of inner freedom. Others' words only have power when you give it to them. You cannot control what others think, say, or judge, but you can absolutely control the one thing that matters: how you respond. There will be times when you're misunderstood, unfairly criticized, or even insulted. Our instinctive reaction is often to justify, explain, defend ourselves. But the first question you must ask is this really worth reacting to? A Stoic sees criticism as a test, not of right or wrong, but of how well you master yourself. They understand it's not the words that hurt, it's our overinvestment in them, our craving to be understood and validated. That causes pain. And when we react to baseless attacks, we not only waste energy, we give others control over our emotions. Silence in these moments doesn't mean weakness or surrender. On the contrary, it's a sign of inner strength. When you choose not to respond, you're not avoiding, you're controlling the space within you. You're telling yourself, I don't need to prove anything, I know who I am. And their words don't change that. An emotionally mature person does not let themselves be drawn into battles that were meaningless from the start. They don't need to shout to prove they're right. They just need to live rightly and let time speak for itself. Because truth doesn't need to scream, it always finds its way in the long run. When you stay silent in the face of attack, you're also teaching others a lesson without lecturing, that you're not easily shaken, not easily manipulated, and not living to please. Others may say whatever they want. That's their freedom. But you can choose not to let their words take root in your mind, and that's your freedom. Remember, your value doesn't lie in others' approval. It lies in how you handle injustice while preserving your dignity. And sometimes, silence is the voice of pride, a pride that seeks no recognition, but simply lives in truth. When words lose their value, let silence speak. There's a subtle paradox in life. The more we talk, the less our words are worth. Today's world is flooded with noise, news, debates, advice, rebuttals, emotional outbursts. Everyone is in a rush to speak, as if silence would make them disappear. But amid this chaos, there is one voice that echoes the loudest: intentional silence. The Stoic understands that words carry weight only when used at the right time, in the right way, and for the right purpose. They don't feel the need to fill every space with speech. They treat words like a precious resource used only when they create true value. Have you ever noticed that the most respected people often say the least? They listen more, observe more deeply, and when they speak, the room falls silent, not because their voice is loud, but because their presence is grounded. Their words are not fired randomly, but like arrows released after careful aim. In contrast, those who speak too much, without pause, often cheapen their own speech, not because they lack value, but because they don't know when to stop. And worse, when they do have something meaningful to say, people have already stopped listening. People who live with purpose don't need words to justify every step. They let their actions and consistency speak. Clear-minded individuals don't let themselves be drawn into meaningless conversations. They understand every word consumes energy, so let it serve something meaningful. Silence is not a lack of communication. It's a necessary filter that preserves what's worth being heard. It creates space to observe more deeply, connect more genuinely, and think more clearly. And when you choose silence over excessive talk, you're building a trustworthy image, someone who speaks little, but when they do, everyone listens. Instead of asking, "What should I say?" learn to ask, "Do I really need to say this?" If the answer is no, let silence answer for you, because in that silence, there is courage, wisdom, and the presence of someone who lives with depth. Don't fear silence. Let it be the clearest sign that you are in control of yourself, and that you know when a word will bring value, or when it should be held back, to preserve your integrity, when the other person isn't seeking truth. Don't let them pull you into chaos. Not everyone argues for the sake of truth. Some begin a conversation not to understand, but to win. They don't seek truth, nor do they care to listen. They want control, domination, to corner you by manipulating words. And if you're not mindful, you'll fall into the trap they've set, a never-ending argument where logic is twisted and peace is sacrificed for victory. The Stoic recognizes early that not every battle is worth joining. They understand that some people aren't looking for answers, they're just waiting for you to react so they can attack. In these situations, the best response is not to counter, but to withdraw. Silence here isn't weakness or surrender. It's a conscious choice not to be dragged into unnecessary chaos. It's how you preserve your clarity and values in a space clouded by confusion and negativity. Because the more you react, the more you lose control. And those most eager to prove they're right are often the ones most trapped by ego. Let them argue with your silence. Let them see that you're not easily pulled into their game, where words are distorted, truth is hidden, and the only goal is to win at all costs eventually. They'll find themselves shouting into emptiness with no one left to fight. People who live with purpose and clear thinking don't waste energy on battles that lead nowhere. They know the difference between a conversation that builds and an argument that destroys. They don't need to win every verbal exchange. They need to preserve their peace for the longer journey, living true to their values. Because if you spend all your time proving yourself to people who don't want to understand, you'll miss the chance to grow with those who are truly listening. And if you let yourself be swept away by meaningless debates, you're no longer steering your life, you're just reacting to noise. So next time someone tries to drag you into a battle of ego, remember, you don't have to answer every provocation sometimes. Silence is how you protect your wisdom, your peace, and your dignity. And that is the most silent, yet most profound victory, when you listen not just to understand, but to grow. In most conversations, we don't really listen. We wait for our turn to speak, prepare a rebuttal in our minds, or think about what story we'll tell next. True listening, the kind that can transform relationships, shift perspectives, and even reshape who we are, is a rare skill. And the Stoic understands that deep listening carries more power than words. Listening is not just about hearing sounds, it's about observing eyes, tone, the silence between sentences, and even the things unsaid. Those who truly listen grasp the whole picture, not just the surface of the words. They understand not only what someone is saying, but what drives them to say it. Silence during listening isn't emptiness. It is a space for the other person to fully be themselves. It's a moment where you set aside your ego, no interruptions, no fixing, no trying to sound smart, just your full presence. When you truly listen, you make others feel respected, seen, and understood. It's a rare gift that no words can replace. People with purpose don't speak to prove themselves right. They listen to, first understand correctly. Clear thinkers don't make decisions from reflex. They build them from insight. And insight comes only when you're patient enough to listen without judgment, humble enough to learn from anyone, and strong enough to stay silent until there's something worth saying. Listening is also a lesson in resilience, because sometimes you'll hear things that upset you, challenge you, or contradict you, but instead of reacting, the Stoic observes their own emotions, accepts them, and reflects afterward. They don't let words wound them. They use them to understand themselves more deeply. Wise people speak little, not because they have nothing to say, but because they've listened enough to know when silence is power and speech is purpose. And when they do speak, their words come from reflection, not reaction. Their speech carries weight, creates impact, and touches what truly matters. So if you want to grow, if you want to understand others, if you want to be truly present in life, start by being silent enough to listen. It's not just a simple act, it's the foundation for your daily growth, both in mind and in soul. Stay silent to stay true to your values, without needing to prove anything. There are moments in life when you clearly feel caught between two forces. One side is the crowd, public opinion, the pressure to speak up or do something that appears right in others' eyes. The other is your inner voice, quiet but firm, reminding you of your principles and the values you live by. In moments like these, choosing silence isn't avoidance. It's a silent declaration of integrity. The Stoic doesn't live for validation. They don't act to seek agreement. And they certainly don't fear being judged. They live by values forged within values, unchanging in the face of emotion or the crowd's gaze. And that's why, when they fall silent, that silence carries more weight than any justification. You don't owe everyone an explanation for your choices. You don't owe the world a report on why you didn't react, didn't speak up, or didn't do what others expected. They may misunderstand you. They may criticize you. But if that means staying consistent with yourself, then that is a price worth paying. Sometimes, you'll find yourself in spaces where people live by shallow standards, where truth is just what someone shouts the loudest. You'll find yourself surrounded by voices chanting something you don't believe in, and you may feel alone, even isolated. But in that silence, you're holding on to the most important thing. You are not betraying yourself. People who live with purpose and values don't flaunt their morality. They show it through consistent action, through calm in the face of panic, through not speaking words they don't believe. That silence is a boundary, a line between what's right and what's easy, between pleasing others and staying true to yourself. And the remarkable thing is, that silence creates the greatest impact. Others may not understand you at first, but over time, they will see you are not easily swayed. You are someone of principle. You don't live for applause, you live to uphold what you believe is right. At that point, silence is no longer a reaction. It becomes an intentional act, a way to affirm yourself without debate, a way to protect your values without shouting into the crowd. Because in the end, integrity isn't in your words. It's in the alignment between what you believe and how you live, even when no one is watching. When pain doesn't need to be shared to be valid. Everyone has been hurt. Some wounds come unexpectedly. Some losses linger in silence. Some scars, thought to be healed, still bleed when accidentally touched. Our natural instinct is to tell our stories of pain to be heard, to be understood, to have someone say, "I get it, you're not alone." But the Stoic understands, some pain doesn't need to be aired to be real. We live in an age where sharing emotions is easier than ever, but along with openness comes another hunger, a craving to be acknowledged, comforted, defended. Many fall into a loop. They speak of their pain to be seen, to be pitied, and then repeat it, as if the pain itself has become part of their identity. But no one truly moves past the darkness by constantly replaying the story of it. The Stoic doesn't deny pain. They don't suppress emotions or pretend to be strong, but they choose silence in suffering, not to appear resilient, but to give themselves space for real healing, because they know some forms of recovery must happen quietly, without spectators, applause, or guides, only with the self. You may choose to share your pain. That is your right. But there is another right, to protect that sacred process for yourself. Not everyone deserves access to the intimate world where you're healing in these moments. Silence is not isolation. It's a form of deep self-love, a way of shielding your soul from judgment, curiosity, and hollow advice. Silence in pain is a kind of strength, not because you feel nothing, but because you are dealing with everything in the kindest way to yourself. No blaming, no complaining, no victimhood, just the quiet acceptance that pain is part of the path, and you are walking it slowly, but steadily. You may be surprised to realize your greatest growth often doesn't come from advice, but from the moments you face your pain in silence. Keep moving forward as if no one sees you, and in doing so, become unbreakable in ways no one else can measure. Because you don't need recognition to know you've overcome. You just need to look back after the storm and see you're still standing. And that is a silent victory, but one that echoes the longest through your life. When you stand at a crossroad, silence helps you hear your true voice. There are moments in life when you find yourself at a critical crossroad, this path or that, to speak or remain silent, to continue or walk away. In those moments, everyone has advice. Everyone wants to be heard. Opinions come crashing in like waves, pulling you into confusion. You hesitate. You fear making the wrong choice. You feel pressured to decide quickly. But in those very moments, silence becomes your smartest decision. The Stoic knows that important decisions should never be made amidst noise, not because others are unkind or foolish, but because you alone must live with the consequences. No one understands your path better than you. And if the voices outside drown out the voice within, you'll live a life that doesn't belong to you. Silence in such a moment is not delay. It's a deliberate space to listen inward. When you pause, refrain from reacting. Refrain from answering. You give yourself the chance to observe your emotions, to observe your fears, to ask, what's really guiding me? Reason, values, or external pressure. Some people decide too quickly and spend years untangling the consequences. Others fear silence, so they fill it with rushed action. But the clear-minded know clarity takes time. They're not afraid of silence because they understand truth often reveals itself in stillness. Those who live with purpose don't rush. They know direction matters more than speed. And when they go silent at a crossroad, they're not afraid of missing opportunities. They trust that a decision born from clarity will take them farther than any hasty one ever could. To listen to yourself is to reaffirm your place. It's when you ask powerful yet simple questions. What do I really want? Am I doing this out of truth or out of fear? If no one knew this decision, would I still choose it? And when the answer comes from within, not applause, not advice, not expectation, you feel a strange peace, because whatever happens, it's your choice. And what comes from clarity leads to steadiness. So next time you stand at life's crossroad, don't choose just to escape uncertainty. Be still, sit with it. Listen to yourself, because no one else can live your life for you. And You deserve a choice born of mindfulness, not haste. Silence is not emptiness. It's the foundation of inner strength in a world always on the move, where speech is seen as self-assertion, where quick reaction is hailed as intelligent. Silence is often mistaken for weakness. People fear being seen as passive, as overpowered, as invisible if they don't speak up, but the Stoic sees it differently. They know silence is not a void, but a sacred space where inner strength is forged. Many fill silence with meaningless talk, because silence forces us to face ourselves, our thoughts, our emotions, our fears, our doubts. But the Stoic doesn't run from that. They walk into silence as a sanctuary, as a place to cleanse the mind, because they know if you can't sit alone with yourself, you'll always depend on the outside world to define you. Silence is where you hear the things noise usually hides. It's when you recognize what's real and what's a passing reaction. It's when you step back from the urge to have a voice and return to the power of having depth. You don't need to speak to prove you're strong. You just need to be steady enough not to be swept away. When you stay silent in the face of provocation, you say, "I won't lower myself to answer pettiness." When you remain quiet, instead of explaining yourself to someone who doesn't want to understand, you protect your energy and dignity. When you stay still amid chaos, you are like a rock in a rushing stream, unmoved. This silence doesn't come from apathy. It comes from self-mastery, from the understanding that not every situation deserves a reaction. Not everything needs to be said. And sometimes, a grounded presence with no words is the most powerful communication. We admire great speakers and skilled debaters, but rarely do we realize that those who influence most lastingly are those whose quiet presence commands respect. They don't speak much, but when they do, people stop and listen. People of depth don't seek external echoes. They create internal resonance, quietly sharpening themselves in moments no one sees. And it is in those silent moments that the foundation is laid for a life of strength, purpose, resilience, and clarity. So if ever you feel lonely in your silence, remember, you are not alone. You are returning to your source of power, and no one can take that from you unless you give it away. If you control your words, you will control your life. Before you say anything, pause and ask, is this necessary? Because every word you utter carries consequences. It can connect or divide, inspire or hurt, show strength or reveal insecurity. And if you don't control your words, sooner or later they'll control your life. The Stoic believes words are not to fill silence, but to express wisdom, kindness, and values. Speaking at the right time, in the right place, to the right person is not just effective communication, it's self-mastery. And those who master their words have cultivated one of the most refined disciplines of all, inner discipline. Recall a time you spoke when you weren't ready, maybe in anger, under pressure, to defend your ego. What happened after regret? You wished you'd stayed silent, wished you'd waited, wished you had let things settle before speaking. Because when you speak unconsciously, words become a burden, not a tool. Now remember a time you chose silence, not out of fear, but because you knew silence would preserve peace. You held back, not from weakness, but to protect something more important to relationship, a truth, your inner values. And when you finally spoke, after that pause, each word carried presence, certainty, and a weight that no loud voice could match. Those who live with purpose don't speak to prove, they speak to serve. Every word is a conscious choice, a choice between peace or conflict, building or breaking, temporary satisfaction or long-term alignment. Being decisive isn't about speaking often, it's about knowing when to speak. and when to stay silent. And you'll notice something strange. The less you speak, the more you're heard, the more you choose your words. The more you're respected, the more you master your speech. The more you shape your life, because you don't react from impulse, you act from principle. The journey to mastering your life doesn't begin with grand gestures. It begins with controlling the smallest things like your daily words, knowing when to be silent, when to speak, when to simply smile and walk away in that mindfulness. You're not just mastering words, you're mastering yourself. Because in the end, a person is not defined by how often they speak, but by the quality of what they leave behind each time they choose to speak or choose silence. And that's where real power begins.